Every house in 1950s had 6 people. No budget, no fancy ingredients, but they were happy. Why? Because Grandma made supper stretchers that turned 1 pound of meat into 6 full plates. Today, with more money and resources, we can't do what she did. We've lost her magic. Let's rediscover 60 forgotten supper stretchers. You'll wish they never vanished. It was resourceful, but pantry bread meatballs was a lovable supper on every thrifty table. Grandma soaked 2 slices of white bread in milk until they were soggy, then squeezed out the excess liquid. She crumbled a pound of ground beef into a bowl, added the soaked bread, an egg, a diced onion, salt and pepper, and mixed it all together by feel. The bread stretched 1 pound of meat into 20 meatballs big enough to feed 6 people. She rolled them by hand and fried them in a hot skillet until they were browned on all sides. Then she poured in a can of tomato sauce, brought it to a simmer, and let the meatballs cook in the sauce for 15 minutes. Families ate them hot over spaghetti or with mashed potatoes. Some grandmas added garlic powder or Parmesan cheese to the meat mixture. The bread kept the meatballs tender and moist, never dry. By the 1980s, frozen meatballs replaced homemade, and pantry bread meatballs vanished from home kitchens. It was practical, but rice-bulked hamburger loaf was a lovable supper on every budget table. Grandma cooked 2 cups of white rice and let it cool. She crumbled a pound of ground beef into a bowl, added the cooked rice, an egg, a diced onion, ketchup, salt, and pepper, and mixed it all together by feel. The rice stretched 1 pound of meat into a loaf big enough to feed 6 people. She packed the mixture into a greased loaf pan, smoothed the top, and spread ketchup over it. She baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour until it was firm and browned. Families ate it sliced thick, with gravy or more ketchup on top. Some grandmas added diced bell peppers or a splash of Worcestershire sauce to the mixture. The rice made the loaf hearty and filling, and it stayed moist for days. By the 1980s, all beef meatloaf became the standard, and rice-bulked hamburger loaf disappeared from home kitchens. It was simple, but oat-stuffed meat patties was a lovable supper on every working-class table. Grandma mixed a pound of ground beef with a cup of rolled oats, an egg, a diced onion, salt, and pepper. The oats stretched 1 pound of meat into 8 or 9 patties, big enough to feed 6 people. She formed the mixture into flat patties and fried them in a hot skillet with a little shortening until they were browned and cooked through, about 4 minutes per side. The oats soaked up the meat juices and kept the patties moist and tender. Families ate them hot with mashed potatoes and gravy. Some grandmas added a tablespoon of ketchup or Worcestershire sauce to the meat mixture for extra flavor. Others served them on buns like hamburgers. The oats added bulk and fiber, making the patties more filling. By the 1980s, all beef patties became the standard, and oat-stuffed meat patties vanished from home kitchens. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email, too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. It was clever, but potato-filled meatloaf was a lovable supper on every depression table. Grandma boiled 2 large potatoes, mashed them smooth, and let them cool. She crumbled a pound of ground beef into a bowl, added the mashed potatoes, an egg, a diced onion, salt, and pepper, and mixed it all together by feel. The potatoes stretched 1 pound of meat into a loaf big enough to feed 6 people. She packed the mixture into a greased loaf pan, smoothed the top, and spread ketchup over it. She baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour until it was firm and browned. Families ate it sliced thick, with gravy or ketchup on top. Some grandmas added diced carrots or celery to the mixture for extra flavor. The potatoes made the loaf dense and moist, and it stayed fresh for days. By the 1980s, all beef meatloaf became the standard, and potato-filled meatloaf disappeared from home kitchens. It was thrifty, but tuna croquette casserole was a lovable supper on every budget table. Grandma drained 2 cans of tuna and flaked them into a bowl. She added 2 cups of mashed potatoes, an egg, a diced onion, salt, and pepper, and mixed it all together by feel. The potatoes stretched 2 cans of tuna into 12 croquettes big enough to feed 6 people. She formed the mixture into oval patties, rolled them in crushed crackers, and fried them in a hot skillet until they were golden and crispy. Families ate them hot with tartar sauce or lemon wedges. Some grandmas baked them in a casserole dish instead of frying, layering them with cream of mushroom soup. The potatoes kept the croquettes moist and tender, never dry. By the 1980s, frozen fish sticks replaced homemade croquettes, and tuna croquette casserole vanished from home kitchens. These 5 stretchers, pantry bread meatballs, rice-bulked hamburger loaf, oat-stuffed meat patties, potato-filled meatloaf, and tuna croquette casserole turned 1 pound of meat into meals for 6. Grandma mixed them by feel, using cheap fillers. They filled tables during tight times, and all have vanished completely. It was economical, but egg-boosted salmon loaf was a lovable supper on every frugal table. Grandma drained a can of salmon, picked out the bones, and flaked it into a bowl. She added 3 hard-boiled eggs, chopped, a cup of breadcrumbs, a diced onion, salt, and pepper, and mixed it all together by feel. The eggs stretched 1 can of salmon into a loaf big enough to feed 6 people. She packed the mixture into a greased loaf pan and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes until it was firm and golden. Families ate it sliced thick with tartar sauce or lemon wedges. Some grandmas added diced celery or a splash of lemon juice to the mixture for extra flavor. The eggs made the loaf hearty and filling, and it stayed moist for days. By the 1980s, canned salmon became less popular, and egg-boosted salmon loaf disappeared from home kitchens. It was comforting, but biscuit-topped meat pie was a lovable supper on every farmhouse table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a skillet. She added diced carrots, diced potatoes, a can of peas, salt and pepper, and stirred in a tablespoon of flour and a cup of water to make a thick gravy. The vegetables stretched 1 pound of meat into a filling big enough to feed 6 people. She poured the mixture into a casserole dish. Then she made a simple biscuit dough, flour, baking powder, shortening, and milk, and dropped spoonfuls on top of the meat mixture. She baked it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the biscuits were golden and fluffy. Families ate it hot, scooping the biscuits and gravy onto their plates. Some grandmas used canned biscuits to save time. By the 1980s, frozen pot pies replaced homemade, and biscuit-topped meat pie vanished from home kitchens. It was simple, but chicken and noodle bake was a lovable supper on every weeknight table. Grandma boiled a whole chicken until the meat was tender, then shredded it by hand. She boiled a pound of egg noodles until soft, then drained them. In a casserole dish, she mixed the shredded chicken, cooked noodles, 2 cans of cream of chicken soup, and a cup of milk. The noodles stretched 1 chicken into a casserole big enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together, topped it with crushed crackers, and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until it was bubbly and golden. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish. Some grandmas added frozen peas or diced carrots to the mixture. The noodles made the casserole hearty and filling, and it stayed moist for days. By the 1980s, rotisserie chickens replaced boiled, and chicken and noodle bake disappeared from home kitchens. It was hearty, but bean-stretched beef goulash was a lovable supper on every working-class table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a large pot. She added a can of kidney beans, drained, a can of diced tomatoes, 2 cups of cooked elbow macaroni, and a tablespoon of chili powder. The beans and macaroni stretched 1 pound of meat into a pot big enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together and let it simmer for 15 minutes until the flavors melded. Families ate it hot, ladled into bowls. Some grandmas added diced bell peppers or a dash of hot sauce for extra flavor. The beans made the goulash thick and filling, and it tasted better the next day. By the 1980s, boxed pasta mixes replaced homemade goulash, and bean-stretched beef goulash vanished from home kitchens. It was rustic, but cornmeal beef bake was a lovable supper on every depression table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a skillet. She added a can of diced tomatoes, a can of corn, drained, salt, pepper, and a tablespoon of chili powder. The corn stretched 1 pound of meat into a filling big enough to feed 6 people. She poured the mixture into a casserole dish. Then she made a cornbread topping, cornmeal, flour, baking powder, an egg, milk, and melted shortening, and spread it over the meat. She baked it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the cornbread was golden and set. Families ate it hot, cutting it into squares. Some grandmas added diced bell peppers or jalapenos to the meat. The cornbread soaked up the meat juices and turned soft and savory. By the 1980s, boxed cornbread mix replaced homemade, and cornmeal beef bake disappeared from home kitchens. These 5 stretchers, egg-boosted salmon loaf, biscuit-topped meat pie, chicken and noodle bake, bean-stretched beef goulash, and cornmeal beef bake, turned small amounts of protein into full suppers for 6. Grandma used fillers like eggs, biscuits, noodles, beans, and cornbread. All have vanished completely. It was ingenious, but cabbage-wrapped beef rolls was a lovable supper on every immigrant table. Grandma boiled a head of cabbage until the leaves were soft and pliable. She crumbled a pound of ground beef into a bowl, added a cup of cooked rice, a diced onion, an egg, salt, and pepper, and mixed it by feel. The rice stretched 1 pound of meat into 12 rolls big enough to feed 6 people. She spooned the meat mixture onto each cabbage leaf, folded the sides in, and rolled them tight. She placed the rolls seam-side down in a baking dish, poured a can of tomato sauce over them, and baked them at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. Families ate them hot with extra sauce. Some grandmas added raisins or brown sugar to the tomato sauce for sweetness. By the 1980s, cabbage rolls seemed too labor-intensive, and they vanished from home kitchens. It was colorful, but pepper and rice meatboats was a lovable supper on every family table. Grandma cut bell peppers in half lengthwise and removed the seeds. She browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a skillet. She added 2 cups of cooked rice, a can of tomato sauce, salt, and pepper, and stirred it all together. The rice stretched 1 pound of meat into a filling big enough to stuff 12 pepper halves and feed 6 people. She spooned the mixture into the pepper halves, placed them in a baking dish, covered with foil, and baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes until the peppers were tender. Families ate them hot, with extra sauce spooned over. Some grandmas topped the peppers with shredded cheese in the last 10 minutes of baking. By the 1980s, microwaves replaced slow baking, and pepper and rice meatboats disappeared from home kitchens. It was clever, but potato-topped fish cakes was a lovable supper on every coastal table. Grandma drained 2 cans of tuna or salmon and flaked them into a bowl. She added 3 cups of mashed potatoes, an egg, a diced onion, salt, and pepper, and mixed it all together by feel. The potatoes stretched 2 cans of fish into 10 cakes, big enough to feed 6 people. She formed the mixture into flat patties, rolled them in flour, and fried them in a hot skillet with shortening until they were golden and crispy on both sides. Families ate them hot with tartar sauce or lemon wedges. Some grandmas added diced celery or parsley to the mixture for extra flavor. The potatoes kept the cakes moist and tender inside, while the outside crisped up beautifully. By the 1980s, frozen fish sticks replaced homemade fish cakes, and potato-topped fish cakes vanished from home kitchens. It was filling, but macaroni and beef casserole was a lovable supper on every weeknight table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a skillet. She boiled 2 cups of elbow macaroni until tender, then drained it. In a casserole dish, she mixed the cooked beef, cooked macaroni, 2 cans of tomato soup, and a cup of milk. The macaroni stretched 1 pound of meat into a casserole big enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together, topped it with shredded cheddar cheese, and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until it was bubbly and the cheese was melted. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish. Some grandmas added diced bell peppers or a dash of Worcestershire sauce for extra flavor. The macaroni made the casserole thick and hearty. By the 1980s, hamburger helper replaced homemade casseroles, and macaroni and beef casserole disappeared from home kitchens. It was warming, but carrot-filled beef stew was a lovable supper on every winter table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a large pot. She added 4 cups of sliced carrots, 4 cups of diced potatoes, a can of diced tomatoes, and enough water to cover everything. The carrots and potatoes stretched 1 pound of meat into a stew big enough to feed 6 people. She added salt, pepper, and a bay leaf, brought it to a boil, then reduced the heat and let it simmer for 45 minutes until the vegetables were tender. Families ate it hot, ladled into bowls with crusty bread for dipping. Some grandmas added celery or turnips to the stew for extra flavor. The carrots sweetened the broth naturally, and the stew tasted better the next day. By the 1980s, canned stews replaced homemade, and carrot-filled beef stew vanished from home kitchens. It was comforting, but tomato-enhanced hamburger soup was a lovable supper on every cold table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a large pot. She added a can of diced tomatoes, a can of tomato soup, 4 cups of water, diced potatoes, diced carrots, and diced celery. The tomatoes and vegetables stretched 1 pound of meat into a pot big enough to feed 6 people. She added salt, pepper, and a bay leaf, brought it to a boil, then reduced the heat and let it simmer for 30 minutes until the vegetables were tender. Families ate it hot, ladled into bowls with saltine crackers on the side. Some grandmas added cooked rice or macaroni to the soup to make it even heartier. The tomatoes gave the broth a tangy sweetness, and the soup tasted better the next day. By the 1980s, canned soups replaced homemade, and tomato-enhanced hamburger soup vanished from home kitchens. It was golden, but corn-patted chicken pie was a lovable supper on every Sunday table. Grandma boiled a whole chicken until the meat was tender, then shredded it by hand. In a casserole dish, she mixed the shredded chicken with a can of cream of chicken soup, a can of corn, drained, and a cup of milk. The corn stretched 1 chicken into a filling big enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together and smoothed it into an even layer. Then she made a simple biscuit dough, flour, baking powder, shortening, and milk, and dropped spoonfuls on top. She baked it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the biscuits were golden and fluffy. Families ate it hot, scooping the biscuits and creamy chicken onto their plates. Some grandmas added frozen peas or diced carrots to the filling. By the 1980s, frozen chicken pot pies replaced homemade, and corn-padded chicken pie vanished from home kitchens. It was easy, but spaghetti and beef casserole was a lovable supper on every busy table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion in a skillet. She boiled a pound of spaghetti until tender, then drained it. In a casserole dish, she mixed the cooked beef, cooked spaghetti, a jar of tomato sauce, and a cup of shredded mozzarella cheese. The spaghetti stretched 1 pound of meat into a casserole big enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together, topped it with more cheese, and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until it was bubbly and golden. Families ate it hot, cutting it into squares like lasagna. Some grandmas added diced bell peppers or mushrooms to the meat sauce. The spaghetti soaked up the sauce and turned soft and savory. By the 1980s, microwavable pasta dishes replaced homemade casseroles, and spaghetti and beef casserole disappeared from home kitchens. It was simple, but pea-enhanced tuna bake was a lovable supper on every Lent table. Grandma drained 2 cans of tuna and flaked them into a bowl. She boiled a pound of egg noodles until tender, then drained them. In a casserole dish, she mixed the tuna, cooked noodles, 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup, a cup of milk, and a cup of frozen peas. The peas and noodles stretched 2 cans of tuna into a casserole big enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together, topped it with crushed potato chips, and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until it was bubbly and the chips were golden. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish. Some grandmas added diced celery or a splash of lemon juice for extra flavor. The peas added color and sweetness, and the chips added crunch. By the 1990s, microwavable dinners replaced homemade casseroles, and pea-enhanced tuna bake vanished from home kitchens. It was hearty, but chicken biscuit stew was a lovable supper on every fall table. Grandma boiled a whole chicken until the meat was tender, then shredded it by hand. In a large pot, she added the shredded chicken, diced potatoes, sliced carrots, diced celery, and a diced onion and enough chicken broth to cover everything. The vegetables stretched 1 chicken into a stew big enough to feed 6 people. She brought it to a boil, then reduced the heat and let it simmer for 30 minutes until the vegetables were tender. She thickened the broth with a flour slurry, then dropped spoonfuls of biscuit dough on top, covered the pot, and let the biscuits steam for 15 minutes until they were fluffy. Families ate it hot, ladled into bowls. Some grandmas added frozen peas in the last 5 minutes. By the 1980s, canned chicken stew replaced homemade, and chicken biscuit stew vanished from home kitchens. These 5 stretchers, tomato-enhanced hamburger soup, corn-padded chicken pie, spaghetti and beef casserole, pea-enhanced tuna bake, and chicken biscuit stew turned small amounts of protein into full suppers for 6. Grandma used tomatoes, corn, spaghetti, peas, and biscuits to stretch every meal. All have vanished. It was refreshing, but celery-boosted chicken salad was a lovable supper on every summer table. Grandma boiled a whole chicken in salted water with a bay leaf until the meat was tender enough to pull from the bones. She let it cool on a plate, then shredded the meat into bite-sized pieces with her hands. She washed and trimmed 4 stalks of celery, diced them finely, and mixed them with the shredded chicken in a large bowl. The celery stretched 1 chicken into a salad big enough to feed 6 people. She added enough mayonnaise to coat everything, about a cup, along with salt, pepper, and a squeeze of lemon juice. She stirred it gently, covered the bowl, and put it in the refrigerator for at least an hour so the flavors could blend. Families ate it cold, scooped onto lettuce leaves, or piled between slices of white bread for sandwiches. Some grandmas added halved grapes for a touch of sweetness. Others stirred in chopped walnuts for crunch, or a spoonful of sweet pickle relish for tang. The celery added bulk and a satisfying crunch without overpowering the chicken. It was perfect for church potlucks because it traveled well and stayed fresh. By the 1980s, rotisserie chickens and pre-made deli salads replaced homemade versions. Younger cooks stopped boiling whole chickens, and the art of stretching one bird with celery into a meal for six was forgotten. The simple chicken salad disappeared from home kitchens and replaced by convenience foods that cost more and tasted less like home. It was ingenious, but potato-stuffed fish loaf was a lovable supper on every Catholic Friday table. Grandma peeled 3 large russet potatoes, cut them into chunks, and boiled them in salted water until they were fork-tender. She drained and mashed them smooth, then let them cool completely. She opened 2 cans of tuna or salmon, drained them well, and flaked the fish into a mixing bowl with a fork. She added the cooled mashed potatoes, 2 beaten eggs, a finely diced onion, a cup of breadcrumbs, salt, and pepper, and mixed everything by hand until it held together. The mashed potatoes stretched 2 cans of fish into a loaf large enough to feed 6 people. She pressed the mixture into a greased loaf pan, and smoothed the top with the back of a spoon and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes until it was firm and lightly browned. Families ate it sliced thick, served warm or cold with tartar sauce or a squeeze of lemon. Some grandmas added diced celery or a tablespoon of fresh parsley for color and flavor. Others spread a thin layer of ketchup on top before baking. The potatoes kept the loaf moist and gave it structure, so it sliced cleanly without falling apart. By the 1980s, frozen fish sticks and fast food fish sandwiches replaced homemade fish loaves. The tradition of stretching canned fish with mashed potatoes vanished, and potato-stuffed fish loaf disappeared from home kitchens completely. It was efficient, but rice-extended beef skillet was a lovable supper on every weeknight table. Grandma heated a heavy cast-iron skillet on the stovetop and crumbled in a pound of ground beef. She browned it over medium heat, breaking it apart with a wooden spoon, then added a diced onion and cooked until it was soft and translucent. She didn't drain the fat. She left it in for flavor. She stirred in 1½ cups of uncooked white rice, letting it toast for a minute in the beef fat. Then she poured in a can of diced tomatoes and 2 cups of water, added salt, pepper, and a pinch of paprika, and stirred everything together. The rice stretched 1 pound of beef into a skillet full enough to feed 6 people. She brought it to a boil, covered the skillet tightly with a lid, and reduced the heat to low. The rice simmered for 25 minutes, absorbing all the liquid and turning tender and fluffy. She let it rest off the heat for 5 minutes before serving. Families ate it hot, scooped straight from the skillet onto plates. Some grandmas added a diced green bell pepper with the onion for extra flavor. Others stirred in shredded cheese at the end or topped each serving with sour cream. By the 1980s, boxed rice mixes like rice-a-roni replaced homemade skillets. The from-scratch version that used just rice, beef, and tomatoes vanished, and rice-extended beef skillet disappeared from home kitchens. It was warming, but bean-filled chili pot was a lovable supper on every winter table. Grandma placed a large pot on the stove and browned a pound of ground beef over medium heat, breaking it into small pieces. She added a diced onion and cooked until it softened. Then she stirred in 2 cans of kidney beans, drained and rinsed, a large can of diced tomatoes, a small can of tomato sauce, and a cup of water. The beans stretched 1 pound of beef into a pot big enough to feed 6 people. She seasoned it with a heaping tablespoon of chili powder, a teaspoon of cumin, a ½ teaspoon of garlic powder, and salt and pepper to taste. She brought it to a boil, then reduced the heat and let it simmer uncovered for 30 minutes, stirring occasionally to prevent sticking. The longer it simmered, the thicker and richer it became. Families ate it hot, ladled into bowls, and topped with shredded cheddar cheese, sour cream, and chopped onions. Some grandmas added a diced green bell pepper or a handful of frozen corn for extra texture. Others threw in a pinch of cayenne pepper for heat. Cornbread or saltine crackers on the side soaked up the thick, spicy broth. Leftovers tasted even better the next day after the flavors had time to meld overnight. By the 1980s, canned chili and Wendy's chili replaced homemade. The tradition of stretching beef with beans to feed a family vanished, and bean-filled chili pot disappeared from home kitchens. It was crispy, but cracker-topped salmon patties was a lovable supper on every budget table. Grandma opened a tall can of pink salmon, drained it into the sink, and picked out any large bones and dark skin, though she often left the soft bones in for extra calcium. She flaked the salmon into a mixing bowl with a fork. She crushed a full sleeve of saltine crackers into fine crumbs, about a cup and a half, and added them to the salmon, along with 2 beaten eggs and a finely diced onion. The crackers stretched 1 can of salmon into 8 or 9 patties, large enough to feed 6 people. She seasoned the mixture with salt, black pepper, and a good squeeze of lemon juice, then mixed it all together with her hands until it was sticky and held its shape when pressed. She formed it into flat, palm-sized patties. She heated a cast-iron skillet with a few tablespoons of shortening or vegetable oil over medium heat. She fried the patties for about 4 minutes per side until they were deep golden brown and crispy on the outside. Some grandmas used Ritz crackers instead of saltines for a richer, buttery flavor. Others added a tablespoon of Old Bay seasoning or fresh chopped parsley. The patties were drained on newspaper or paper towels to absorb excess grease. Families ate them hot with lemon wedges, tartar sauce, or a side of coleslaw. By the 1980s, frozen fish sticks replaced homemade patties, and cracker-topped salmon patties vanished from home kitchens. It was classic, but tuna and noodle casserole was a lovable supper on every Friday table. Grandma boiled a full pound of egg noodles in salted water until they were tender, then drained them in a colander and set them aside. She opened 3 cans of tuna, drained them thoroughly, and flaked the fish into a large mixing bowl. She added the cooked noodles, 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup, a cup of whole milk, and a cup of frozen peas straight from the freezer. No need to thaw. The noodles and peas stretched 3 cans of tuna into a casserole large enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together gently so the tuna wouldn't break apart too much, then poured it into a buttered 9 by 13 baking dish and smoothed the top. She covered the dish with aluminum foil and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until it was bubbling around the edges. Then she removed the foil and sprinkled a generous layer of crushed potato chips over the top and returned it to the oven uncovered for 10 more minutes until the chips turned golden and crunchy. Families ate it hot, scooping big portions onto plates. Some grandmas added diced celery or sliced mushrooms for extra texture. Others used crushed cornflakes instead of potato chips. A dash of paprika on top added color. By the 1990s, microwavable meals replaced casseroles, and tuna and noodle casserole became a punchline for bland cooking. The homemade version vanished from home kitchens. It was savory, but onion-patted meat pie was a lovable supper on every cold table. Grandma heated a heavy skillet on the stovetop and browned a pound of ground beef, breaking it into small crumbles. Once it was cooked through, she added 2 large yellow onions, unsliced thin, and cooked them slowly in the beef fat, stirring often until they turned soft, golden, and sweet, about 15 minutes. The onions stretched 1 pound of beef into a filling large enough to feed 6 people. She sprinkled a tablespoon of flour over the meat and onions, stirred it in, then poured in a cup of beef broth or water and stirred until it thickened into a rich gravy. She let it cool slightly while she rolled out a double-crust pie dough, either homemade from flour, shortening, and ice water, or store-bought from the refrigerated section. She pressed one crust into the bottom of a pie pan, spooned in the beef and onion filling, then laid the second crust on top. She crimped the edges to seal and cut a few slits in the top to let steam escape. She baked it at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 40 minutes until the crust was golden and flaky. Families ate it hot, sliced into wedges like dessert pie. Some grandmas brushed the top crust with a beaten egg for extra shine. Others added diced carrots or peas to the filling. By the 1980s, frozen pot pies replaced homemade, and onion-padded meat pie vanished from home kitchens. It was golden, but breaded chicken cutlets was a lovable supper on every Sunday table. Grandma boiled a whole chicken in salted water with a bay leaf and a halved onion until the meat was tender enough to fall off the bones. She lifted it out, let it cool, then pulled all the meat off by hand and chopped it finely with a knife. She put the chopped chicken into a mixing bowl and added 2 cups of fine breadcrumbs, 2 beaten eggs, a diced onion, salt, and black pepper. The breadcrumbs stretched 1 chicken into 10 or 12 cutlets, large enough to feed 6 people. She mixed everything together with her hands until it was sticky and held its shape when pressed. She formed the mixture into flat oval patties about ½ an inch thick. She heated a cast-iron skillet with a few tablespoons of shortening or lard over medium heat. She fried the cutlets for about 4 minutes per side until they were deep golden brown and crispy on the outside. Some grandmas added a tablespoon of dried parsley or a pinch of garlic powder to the mixture for extra flavor. It was layered, but cornbread chili bake was a lovable supper on every autumn table. Grandma browned a pound of ground beef in a skillet over medium heat, breaking it into small pieces. She added a diced onion and cooked until it softened. Then she stirred in a can of kidney beans, drained, a can of diced tomatoes, and a small can of tomato sauce. The beans stretched 1 pound of beef into a filling large enough to feed 6 people. She seasoned it with a tablespoon of chili powder, a teaspoon of cumin, a ½ teaspoon of garlic powder, and salt and pepper, then let it simmer for 10 minutes to blend the flavors. While the chili cooked, Grandma made a simple cornbread batter: 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup of flour, a tablespoon of baking powder, a ½ teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon of sugar, 1 beaten egg, a cup of milk, and a ¼ cup of melted shortening. She stirred it just until combined, being careful not to overmix. She poured the hot chili into a greased 9 by 13 baking dish, smoothed it into an even layer, then spread the cornbread batter over the top. She baked it uncovered at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the cornbread was golden brown and a toothpick inserted in the center came out clean. It was nourishing, but carrot-stretched chicken stew was a lovable supper on every winter table. Grandma placed a whole chicken in a large pot, covered it with cold salted water, added a bay leaf and a quartered onion, and brought it to a boil. She reduced the heat and let it simmer gently for an hour until the meat was tender. She lifted the chicken out carefully, let it cool on a plate, then shredded all the meat by hand and discarded the skin and bones. She strained the broth to remove the vegetables and bay leaf, then returned about 6 cups of broth to the pot. She added 4 cups of sliced carrots, 3 cups of diced potatoes, 2 cups of chopped celery, and a diced onion. The carrots and vegetables stretched 1 chicken into a stew large enough to feed 6 people. She brought it to a boil, then reduced the heat and simmered for 25 minutes until the vegetables were tender. She stirred the shredded chicken back into the pot and added salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. These 5 stretchers, tuna and noodle casserole, onion-patted meat pie, breaded chicken cutlets, cornbread chili bake, on and carrot stretched chicken stew, turned small amounts of protein into full suppers for 6. Grandma used noodles, onions, breadcrumbs, cornbread, and carrots to stretch every meal. All have vanished. It was hearty, but tomato-bulked beef hash was a lovable supper on every working-class table. Grandma heated a large, heavy skillet on the stovetop and crumbled in a pound of ground beef. She browned it over medium heat, breaking it into small pieces with a wooden spoon, and left the fat in the pan for flavor. She added a diced onion and cooked until it softened. Then she peeled 3 large potatoes, diced them into small cubes, and added them to the skillet along with a can of diced tomatoes and half a cup of water. The tomatoes and potatoes stretched 1 pound of beef into a hash large enough to feed 6 people. She seasoned it with salt, black pepper, and a pinch of paprika, stirred everything together, and brought it to a simmer. She covered the skillet and cooked it on low heat for 25 minutes, stirring occasionally to prevent sticking until the potatoes were tender and had absorbed the tomato flavor. The hash thickened as it cooked, becoming rich and savory. Families ate it hot, spooned onto plates, sometimes topped with a fried egg for extra protein. It was creamy, but potato-topped tuna chowder was a lovable supper on every Friday table. Grandma peeled 4 large russet potatoes, diced them into small cubes, and placed them in a large pot with enough water to cover them. She added a diced onion, 2 stalks of chopped celery, and a teaspoon of salt. She brought it to a boil, then reduced the heat and simmered for 15 minutes until the potatoes were tender. She drained 3 cans of tuna and flaked them into the pot, then poured in 4 cups of whole milk and added 3 tablespoons of butter. The potatoes stretched 3 cans of tuna into a chowder large enough to feed 6 people. She stirred gently and heated it on low, being careful not to let it boil, which would curdle the milk. Some grandmas mashed a few of the potato cubes against the side of the pot with the back of a spoon to thicken the chowder naturally. She seasoned it with black pepper, a dash of paprika, and a bay leaf for depth. Families ate it hot, ladled into bowls and sprinkled with fresh parsley, with saltine crackers on the side for crumbling into the chowder. Some grandmas added a handful of frozen corn or a diced carrot for color. Others stirred in a splash of heavy cream at the end for extra richness. By the 1980s, canned clam chowder replaced homemade chowders, and potato-topped tuna chowder vanished from home kitchens. It was soothing, but chicken and rice soup was a lovable supper on every sick-day table. Grandma placed a whole chicken in a large pot, covered it with cold salted water, added a quartered onion, and 2 celery stalks, a bay leaf, and a teaspoon of salt, and brought it to a boil. She reduced the heat and let it simmer gently for an hour until the meat was tender. She lifted the chicken out, let it cool, then shredded all the meat by hand. She strained the broth to remove the vegetables and bay leaf, then returned about 8 cups of broth to the pot. She added 2 cups of sliced carrots, 2 cups of chopped celery, and a diced onion, and simmered for 15 minutes until the vegetables were tender. Then she stirred in 1 cup of uncooked long-grain white rice. The rice stretched 1 chicken into a soup large enough to feed 6 people. She cooked the rice for 20 minutes until it was tender and had absorbed some of the broth, thickening the soup. She stirred the shredded chicken back into the pot and added salt, pepper, tucker, and a bay leaf. Families ate it hot, ladled into bowls with saltine crackers or a slice of buttered bread. Some grandmas added a handful of frozen peas or green beans in the last 5 minutes. Others stirred in a splash of cream or a pat of butter for extra richness. By the 1980s, canned chicken rice soup replaced homemade, and chicken and rice soup vanished from home kitchens. It was bubbling, but macaroni beef bake was a lovable supper on every busy table. Grandma heated a skillet on the stovetop and browned a pound of ground beef over medium heat, breaking it into small crumbles. She added a diced onion and cooked until it softened. While the beef cooked, she boiled 2 cups of elbow macaroni in salted water until tender, then drained it. She poured the cooked beef and onions into a large mixing bowl. I added the cooked macaroni, a can of tomato soup, a half cup of milk, and a cup of shredded cheddar cheese. The macaroni stretched 1 pound of beef into a casserole large enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together until well combined, then poured it into a buttered 9 by 13 baking dish. She smoothed the top and sprinkled another cup of shredded cheddar cheese over it. She baked it uncovered at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until the cheese was melted and bubbly and the edges were golden. Families ate it hot, scooping big cheesy portions onto plates. Some grandmas added a diced bell pepper or a handful of frozen peas to the beef mixture for extra vegetables. Others topped it with crushed crackers or breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter before baking for a crunchy topping. A dash of paprika or black pepper added warmth. By the 1980s, hamburger helper and boxed macaroni replaced homemade casseroles. It was satisfying, but bean-stuffed ground beef skillet was a lovable supper on every budget table. Grandma heated a large cast-iron skillet on the stovetop and crumbled in a pound of ground beef. She browned it over medium heat, breaking it into small pieces, then added a diced onion and cooked until it was soft and translucent. She didn't drain the fat, she kept it for flavor. She stirred in 2 cans of pinto beans, drained and rinsed, a can of diced tomatoes, and a half cup of water. The beans stretched 1 pound of beef into a skillet full enough to feed 6 people. She seasoned it with a tablespoon of chili powder, a teaspoon of cumin, a half teaspoon of garlic powder, and salt and pepper to taste. She stirred everything together, brought it to a simmer, then reduced the heat and let it cook uncovered for 20 minutes, stirring occasionally. The beans absorbed the spices and the liquid reduced, leaving a thick, savory mixture. Families ate it hot, spooned over white rice, tucked into warm flour tortillas, or served with a side of cornbread. Some grandmas added a diced green bell pepper or a handful of frozen corn to the skillet for extra flavor and color. Others topped each serving with a dollop of sour cream, a sprinkle of shredded cheese, or a handful of crushed tortilla chips for crunch. A squeeze of lime juice at the end brightened the flavors. These 5 stretchers, tomato bulked beef hash, potato-topped tuna chowder, chicken and rice soup, macaroni beef bake, and bean-stuffed ground beef skillet, turned small amounts of protein into full suppers for 6. Grandma used tomatoes, potatoes, rice, macaroni, and beans to stretch every dollar. All have vanished. It was tender, but bread-bulked beef patties was a lovable supper on every weeknight table. Grandma tore 3 slices of white bread into small pieces and soaked them in a half cup of milk until they were soggy and soft. She squeezed out the excess milk with her hands, then crumbled a pound of ground beef into a large mixing bowl. She added the soaked bread, a beaten egg, a diced onion, salt and black pepper, and mixed everything together by hand until it was sticky and well combined. The bread stretched 1 pound of beef into 8 or 9 patties large enough to feed 6 people. She formed the mixture into flat, round patties about 3/4 of an inch thick. She heated a cast-iron skillet with a few tablespoons of shortening or vegetable oil over medium heat. She fried the patties for about 4 minutes per side until they were browned and cooked through, flipping them carefully with a spatula so they didn't fall apart. The bread kept the patties moist and tender, never dry or crumbly. Some grandmas added a tablespoon of ketchup or mustard to the meat mixture for extra flavor and moisture. It was filling, but potato-bulked beef pie was a lovable supper on every cold table. Grandma peeled 4 large russet potatoes, cut them into chunks, and boiled them in salted water until they were fork-tender. She drained them, mashed them smooth with butter and milk, and set them aside. She heated a skillet on the stovetop and browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion until the meat was cooked through and the onion was soft. The mashed potatoes stretched 1 pound of beef into a pie large enough to feed 6 people. She stirred in a cup of frozen peas, a cup of diced carrots, cooked until tender, salt, and pepper, and a tablespoon of flour mixed with a cup of beef broth to make a thick gravy. She poured the beef mixture into the bottom of a deep pie dish or casserole, smoothed it into an even layer, then spread the mashed potatoes over the top like a crust. She used a fork to make decorative ridges in the potatoes. She baked it at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until the potatoes were golden and the filling was bubbly. Families ate it hot, scooped onto plates like shepherd's pie. Some grandmas added a handful of shredded cheddar cheese on top of the potatoes before baking. Others brushed the potatoes with melted butter for extra color. By the 1980s, frozen shepherd's pie replaced homemade, and potato-bulked beef pie vanished from home kitchens. It was simple, but cracker-extended tuna loaf was a lovable supper on every Lent table. Grandma opened 3 cans of tuna, drained them well, and flaked the fish into a large mixing bowl with a fork. She crushed a full sleeve of saltine crackers into fine crumbs, about 1.5 cups, and added them to the tuna along with 2 beaten eggs, a finely diced onion, a 1/2 cup of milk, salt, and pepper. The crackers stretched 3 cans of tuna into a loaf, large enough to feed 6 people. She mixed everything together by hand until it was sticky and held together when pressed. She packed the mixture into a greased loaf pan, smoothed the top with the back of a spoon, and baked it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes until it was firm and lightly browned on top. Families ate it sliced thick, served warm or cold with tartar sauce, lemon wedges, or a side of coleslaw. Some grandmas added a tablespoon of fresh chopped parsley or a dash of Old Bay seasoning to the mixture for extra flavor. Others spread a thin layer of ketchup or tomato sauce on top before baking. The crackers gave the loaf structure so it sliced cleanly without falling apart, and they soaked up the moisture from the tuna, keeping it tender. By the 1980s, frozen fish sticks and fast-food fish sandwiches replaced homemade fish loaves. The tradition of stretching canned tuna with crackers vanished, and cracker-extended tuna loaf disappeared from home kitchens. It was layered, but corn-stuffed beef tamale pot was a lovable supper on every southwestern table. Grandma heated a skillet on the stovetop and browned a pound of ground beef with a diced onion until the meat was cooked through and the onion was soft. She added a can of whole kernel corn, drained, a can of diced tomatoes, and a tablespoon of chili powder. The corn stretched 1 pound of beef into a filling large enough to feed 6 people. She stirred everything together and let it simmer for 10 minutes to blend the flavors, then poured it into a greased 9 by 13 baking dish. While the filling cooked, Grandma made a simple cornmeal topping. 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup of flour, a tablespoon of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon of sugar, 1 beaten egg, a cup of milk, and a quarter cup of melted shortening. She stirred it just until combined, being careful not to overmix. She spread the cornmeal batter over the beef mixture, smoothing it to the edges. She baked it uncovered at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the topping was golden brown and a toothpick inserted in the center came out clean. Families ate it hot, cutting it into squares like cornbread. Some grandmas added diced green chiles or jalapenos to the beef mixture for extra heat. Others topped each serving with sour cream or shredded cheese. By the 1980s, boxed tamale kits replaced homemade, and corn-stuffed beef tamale pot vanished from home kitchens. It was crisp, but celery-boosted tuna salad was a lovable supper on every summer table. Grandma opened 3 cans of tuna, drained them thoroughly, and flaked the fish into a large mixing bowl with a fork. She washed and trimmed 5 stalks of celery, diced them finely, and added them to the tuna. The celery stretched 3 cans of tuna into a salad large enough to feed 6 people. She added enough mayonnaise to coat everything, about 3/4 of a cup, along with a finely diced onion, salt, black pepper, and a squeeze of fresh lemon juice. She stirred it all together gently, covered the bowl, and put it in the refrigerator for at least an hour so the flavors could blend and the salad could chill completely. Families ate it cold, scooped onto lettuce leaves, piled into hollowed-out tomatoes, or spread between slices of white bread for sandwiches. Some grandmas added a diced hard-boiled egg for extra protein and richness. Others stirred in a tablespoon of sweet pickle relish for tang or a handful of halved grapes for sweetness. Chopped walnuts added crunch and a nutty flavor. The celery added bulk and a satisfying crispness that made the salad feel fresh and light. It was perfect for church potlucks and picnics because it traveled well and didn't need reheating. By the 1980s, pre-made deli tuna salad and rotisserie chicken salads replaced homemade versions. Younger cooks stopped making tuna salad from scratch, and celery-boosted tuna salad vanished from home kitchens. Rehook these 5 stretchers: bread-bulked beef patties, potato-bulked beef pie, cracker-extended tuna loaf, corn-stuffed beef tamale pot, and celery-boosted tuna salad, turned small amounts of protein into full suppers for 6. Grandma used bread, potatoes, crackers, corn, and celery to stretch every dollar. All have vanished. It was satisfying, and this bake fed 6 people for $1.10 in 1954. Grandma browned 1 pound of ground beef in a skillet with diced onion until no pink remained. She boiled 1 pound of spaghetti in salted water until barely tender, drained it, and combined the meat and pasta in a large mixing bowl. She opened 1 can of diced tomatoes and 1 can of tomato sauce, pouring both over the mixture, then stirred in a pinch of sugar, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a tablespoon of dried oregano, salt, and black pepper. The thick, saucy spaghetti was spread into a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish, covered with aluminum foil, and baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. During the last 10 minutes, she removed the foil and sprinkled grated Parmesan cheese on top, allowing it to melt into a golden crust. The spaghetti stretched the beef, the tomatoes added bulk and moisture, and the bake stayed warm on the table for second helpings. Each serving delivered tender noodles, savory meat, and tangy tomato in every forkful. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish, with a slice of buttered bread or a simple green salad on the side. Some grandmas added sliced mushrooms, diced bell peppers, or a handful of frozen peas for extra vegetables. Others topped the casserole with mozzarella instead of Parmesan, creating a cheesy, bubbling crust. A few stirred in a bay leaf during the simmer for deeper flavor, removing it before baking. The beef and spaghetti combination was economical, filling and simple enough for a weeknight supper, requiring only one skillet, one pot, and one baking dish. By the 1980s, jarred spaghetti sauces and microwave lasagnas replaced the homemade bake, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to boil pasta and pour sauce straight from the jar. The ritual of stretching $1.10 worth of beef into 6 hearty servings disappeared, and the spaghetti beef bake that fed a family for pennies vanished from American tables. It was satisfying, and this casserole fed 6 people for 95 cents in 1956. Grandma drained 2 cans of tuna, flaked the fish into a bowl, and grated 3 large carrots on the coarse side of a box grater. She boiled 2 cups of elbow macaroni in salted water until soft, drained it, and combined the macaroni, tuna, and grated carrots in a large mixing bowl. She opened 1 can of cream of celery soup, thinned it with half a cup of milk, and poured the creamy mixture over the tuna and vegetables, stirring until every piece was coated. She seasoned the casserole with a pinch of black pepper, a teaspoon of dried parsley, and a squeeze of lemon juice for brightness. The mixture was spread into a greased 8 by 8-inch baking dish, topped with a handful of crushed saltine crackers mixed with a tablespoon of melted butter, and baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the top turned golden and the edges bubbled. The carrots added sweetness, color, and bulk, stretching the tuna to feed 6. Each spoonful delivered tender macaroni, flaky fish, crunchy carrots, and creamy sauce. Families ate it hot, scooping generous portions onto plates alongside a simple green salad or steamed green beans. Some grandmas added frozen peas, diced celery, or a handful of chopped onion for extra vegetables. Others used cream of mushroom soup instead of celery, or topped the casserole with crushed potato chips for a saltier crunch. A few stirred in a tablespoon of pickle relish or a dash of paprika for tang and color. The casserole was economical, colorful, and simple, requiring only 1 pot, 1 bowl, and 1 baking dish. By the 1980s, fresh tuna steaks and sushi-grade fish became popular, and the humble canned tuna casserole seemed old-fashioned. Younger cooks preferred to order takeout or heat frozen dinners, skipping the labor of grating carrots and mixing ingredients. The ritual of stretching 95 cents worth of tuna and carrots into 6 servings disappeared, and the carrot-padded tuna casserole that fed a family for pennies vanished from American kitchens. It was satisfying, and this soup fed 6 people for $1.25 in 1952. Grandma boiled a whole chicken in a large pot with water, an onion, 2 stalks of celery, a bay leaf, salt, and black pepper for an hour until the meat fell off the bone. She removed the chicken, shredded the meat, discarded the bones and skin, and returned the shredded meat to the broth. She added 2 cans of drained white beans, Navy or Great Northern, along with diced carrots, diced potatoes, and a handful of chopped celery. The soup simmered for another 30 minutes, until the vegetables were tender and the flavors melded. The beans added protein, texture, and bulk, stretching the chicken to feed 6. She ladled the thick, hearty soup into bowls, each one brimming with tender chicken, creamy beans, and soft vegetables in a rich golden broth. Families ate it hot, dunking slices of buttered bread or crackers into the liquid. Some grandmas added a handful of frozen peas, a cup of uncooked rice, or a handful of egg noodles during the final 10 minutes of simmering. Others stirred in a splash of cream or a tablespoon of butter for richness, or sprinkled fresh parsley on top before serving. A few seasoned the soup with a pinch of thyme, rosemary, or garlic powder for deeper flavor. The soup was economical, filling, and simple, requiring only 1 pot and a wooden spoon. By the 1980s, canned chicken soups and instant ramen became pantry pantry staples, and the labor of boiling a whole chicken seemed excessive. Younger cooks preferred to open a can or microwave a cup, skipping the hours of simmering and the mess of shredding meat. The ritual of stretching $1.25 worth of chicken and beans into 6 bowls disappeared, and the bean-padded chicken soup that fed a family for pennies vanished from American tables. That soup that kept families warm and full for over $1 is now a forgotten memory. It was satisfying, and this skillet fed 6 people for 85 cents in 1955. Grandma boiled 2 cups of elbow macaroni in salted water until tender, drained it, and set it aside. In a large cast-iron skillet, she melted 2 tablespoons of butter, then added 1 diced onion and cooked it until soft and translucent. She drained 2 cans of tuna, flaked the fish into the skillet, and stirred it with the onion until warmed through. She poured in 1 can of diced tomatoes with their juice, added a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, and seasoned the mixture with salt, black pepper, and a teaspoon of dried basil. The cooked macaroni was folded into the skillet, and everything simmered together for 10 minutes until the pasta absorbed the tomato juices and the flavors blended. The macaroni stretched the tuna, the tomatoes added moisture and tang, and the skillet stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each serving delivered tender pasta, flaky fish, and savory tomato in every bite. Families ate it hot, straight from the skillet, with a sprinkle of Parmesan cheese or a side of steamed green beans. Some grandmas added frozen peas, diced bell peppers, or a handful of sliced olives for extra vegetables and flavor. Others used cream of tomato soup instead of canned tomatoes, or stirred in a splash of milk for a creamier sauce. A few topped the skillet with a handful of breadcrumbs and broiled it for 2 minutes to create a crunchy crust. The skillet was economical, quick, and simple, requiring only 1 pot and 1 pan. By the 1980s, boxed macaroni and cheese and jarred pasta sauces replaced the homemade skillet, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to boil pasta and stir in a pouch of powdered cheese, skipping the labor of chopping onions and flaking tuna. The ritual of stretching 85 cents worth of tuna and macaroni into 6 servings disappeared, and the tuna macaroni skillet that fed a family for pennies vanished from American kitchens. That skillet that turned canned fish into a hot supper is now a lost tradition. It was satisfying, and this dish fed 6 people for $1.40 in 1958. Grandma bought 6 thin-cut pork chops, patted them dry with a towel, and seasoned both sides with salt and black pepper. She poured half a cup of yellow cornmeal onto a plate, dredged each chop in the cornmeal until coated, and set them aside. In a large cast-iron skillet, she melted 2 tablespoons of lard over medium-high heat, then fried the chops for 4 minutes on each side until the cornmeal crust turned golden and crisp. She removed the chops to a platter, covered them with foil to keep warm, and poured off most of the fat, leaving about 2 tablespoons in the skillet. She whisked in 2 tablespoons of flour, stirring constantly to form a roux, then slowly poured in 2 cups of milk, whisking until the gravy thickened and bubbled. She seasoned the gravy with salt, black pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder, then returned the chops to the skillet, spooning gravy over each one. The dish simmered for 5 minutes, allowing the chops to soak up the creamy gravy. The cornmeal crust added texture and flavor, stretching the pork to feed 6. Each plate held a tender chop blanketed in thick, savory gravy. Families ate it hot, with mashed potatoes, boiled green beans, and a slice of buttered bread to soak up every drop of gravy. Some grandmas added a splash of chicken broth to the gravy for extra richness, or stirred in a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce for depth. Others dusted the chops with flour instead of cornmeal, or added a pinch of cayenne pepper for heat. A few fried the chops in bacon grease for smokier flavor. The dish was economical, filling, and simple, requiring requiring only one skillet and a whisk. By the 1980s, boneless chicken breasts and microwave meals replaced the labor of frying pork chops and making gravy from scratch. Younger cooks preferred to grill or bake lean cuts, skipping the lard and the mess of pan frying. The ritual of stretching $1.40 worth of pork into 6 servings with cornmeal and gravy disappeared, and the dish that fed a family for pennies vanished from American tables. These 5 stretchers, spaghetti beef bake, carrot-patted tuna casserole, bean-patted chicken soup, tuna macaroni skillet, cornmeal-dusted pork chops with gravy, turned modest protein into complete, satisfying meals for under $2, feeding families of 6. Yet today, all have vanished from modern kitchens, replaced by takeout and boxed convenience. It was satisfying, and this skillet fed 6 people for 95 cents in 1953. Grandma browned 1 pound of ground beef in a large cast-iron skillet with 1 diced onion until no pink remained. She shredded half a head of green cabbage into thin strips, added it to the skillet, and stirred until the cabbage wilted and softened, about 10 minutes. She poured in 1 can of diced tomatoes with their juice, added a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, and seasoned the mixture with salt, black pepper, a teaspoon of paprika, and a bay leaf. The skillet simmered uncovered for 20 minutes, allowing the flavors to meld and the cabbage to become tender. The cabbage stretched the beef, the tomatoes added moisture and tang, and the skillet stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each serving delivered savory meat, sweet cabbage, and rich tomato in every forkful. Families ate it hot, straight from the skillet, with a side of boiled potatoes, buttered rice, or a slice of crusty bread. Some grandmas added a cup of uncooked rice to the skillet, turning it into a one-pot meal. Others stirred in a handful of raisins or a tablespoon of brown sugar for sweetness, or added a splash of vinegar for tang. A few topped the skillet with a dollop of sour cream or a sprinkle of fresh dill before serving. The skillet was economical, filling, and simple, requiring only 1 pan and a wooden spoon. By the 1980s, stir-fry vegetables and Asian-inspired cabbage dishes became popular, and the humble beef and cabbage skillet seemed old-fashioned. Younger cooks preferred to order takeout or heat-frozen stir-fry kits, skipping the labor of shredding cabbage and simmering for 20 minutes. The ritual of stretching 95 cents worth of beef and cabbage into 6 servings disappeared, and the cabbage-padded beef skillet that fed a family for pennies vanished from American kitchens. That skillet that turned a few cents of cabbage into a hearty supper is now a forgotten tradition. It was satisfying, and this bake fed 6 people for $1.30 in 1957. Grandma boiled a whole chicken in a large pot with water, an onion, celery, a bay leaf, salt, and black pepper for an hour until tender. She removed the chicken, shredded the meat, discarded the bones and skin, and reserved 2 cups of the broth. In a separate pot, she boiled 1 pound of egg noodles in salted water until soft, then drained them. She combined the shredded chicken and noodles in a large mixing bowl, opened 2 cans of cream of chicken soup, thinned the soup with the reserved broth, and poured the creamy mixture over the chicken and noodles, stirring until everything was coated. She seasoned the mixture with black pepper, a pinch of garlic powder, and a teaspoon of dried parsley. The mixture was spread into a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish covered with aluminum foil and baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. During the last 10 minutes, she removed the foil and sprinkled crushed Ritz crackers mixed with melted butter on top, allowing the topping to turn golden and crisp. The noodles stretched the chicken, the soup added creaminess, and the bake stayed warm on the table for second helping. Each serving delivered tender noodles, flavorful chicken, and creamy sauce in every bite. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish, with a side of steamed green beans or a simple garden salad. Some grandmas added a cup of frozen peas, diced carrots, or sliced mushrooms to the mixture for extra vegetables. Others used cream of mushroom soup instead of chicken, or topped the bake with breadcrumbs instead of crackers. A few stirred in a splash of milk or a tablespoon of sour cream for extra richness. The bake was economical, comforting, and simple, requiring only 2 pots and 1 baking dish. By the 1980s, rotisserie chickens and microwave casseroles replaced the homemade bake, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to buy pre-cooked chicken and heat it in the microwave, skipping the labor of boiling a whole bird and shredding the meat. The ritual of stretching $1.30 worth of chicken into 6 servings with noodles and soup disappeared, and the egg noodle chicken bake vanished from American tables. It was satisfying, and this hash fed 6 people for $1.05 in 1954. Grandma peeled 4 large russet potatoes, rinsed them under cold water, and carefully diced them into half-inch cubes, making sure each piece was roughly the same size so they cooked evenly. She placed the diced potatoes in a pot of salted boiling water and let them cook for exactly 8 minutes until they were just tender, but still held their shape. She drained the potatoes in a colander and set them aside to cool slightly. She sliced 1 pound of smoked sausage, kielbasa, or Polish sausage from the butcher, into thick rounds about half an inch thick. In a large cast-iron skillet, she melted a tablespoon of butter over medium-high heat until it sizzled and foamed. She added the sausage slices to the hot skillet and browned them for about 4 minutes on each side until the edges caramelized and turned deep golden brown, releasing their smoky, savory aroma into the kitchen. She removed the browned sausage to a plate and set it aside. In the same skillet, using the flavorful fat left behind, she added the parboiled potatoes along with 1 diced onion. She cooked everything over medium heat, stirring occasionally with a wooden spoon. For 15 minutes until the potatoes turned golden brown and crispy on the edges and the onion softened and caramelized. She returned the sausage to the skillet, stirring everything together, and seasoned the hash generously with salt, black pepper, a teaspoon of paprika for color and smokiness, and a pinch of garlic powder for depth. The potatoes stretched the sausage, the butter added richness and helped achieve that perfect crispy texture, and the hash stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each serving delivered crispy golden potatoes, savory smoky sausage, and sweet caramelized onions in every forkful. Families ate it hot, straight from the skillet, often topping each portion with a fried egg, sunny side up, so the yolk ran into the hash. It was commonly served with a side of tangy sauerkraut, sliced pickles, and thick slices of rye bread spread with butter. Some grandmas added diced bell peppers, red or green, to the hash for extra color, sweetness, and crunch. Others stirred in shredded cabbage for bulk and nutrition, or added a handful of frozen peas during the last few minutes of cooking. A few used thick-cut bacon instead of sausage, rendering the fat first and using it to fry the potatoes. Some stirred in a splash of apple cider vinegar at the end for a bright, tangy finish. A few topped the finished hash with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and placed the skillet under the broiler for 2 minutes until the cheese melted into a gooey, golden layer. The hash was economical, hearty, satisfying, and simple, requiring only 1 pot for parboiling and 1 skillet for frying. By the 1980s, frozen hash browns in bags and fast food breakfast sandwiches replaced the homemade hash, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to microwave frozen shredded potatoes or order a drive-through breakfast burrito, skipping the labor of peeling, dicing, parboiling, and browning potatoes by hand. It was satisfying, and this casserole fed 6 people for $1.15 in 1956. Grandma browned 1 pound of ground beef in a large cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat, breaking it apart with a wooden spoon and stirring frequently until no pink remained and the meat was crumbly and evenly cooked. She added 1 diced onion to the skillet and cooked it with the beef until it softened and turned translucent, releasing its sweet aroma. She drained off the excess fat, leaving just a tablespoon or 2 in the skillet for flavor and moisture. She added 1½ cups of uncooked long-grain white rice directly to the skillet, stirring it into the beef and onion mixture until every grain was coated with the savory drippings. She opened 1 can of diced tomatoes and 1 can of tomato sauce, pouring both into the skillet, along with all the juices. She added 2½ cups of water, a generous pinch of sugar to balance the acidity of the tomatoes, a teaspoon of chili powder for warmth and depth, salt, and black pepper. She stirred everything together, scraping up any browned bits stuck to the bottom of the skillet. She brought the mixture to a rolling boil over high heat, then immediately reduced the heat to low, covered the skillet tightly with a lid, and let it simmer undisturbed for 25 minutes. The rice absorbed the liquid slowly, becoming tender and fluffy while soaking up all the savory tomato and beef flavors. After 25 minutes, she removed the lid, fluffed the rice gently with a fork, and let the casserole rest for 5 minutes to allow the steam to settle and the flavors to meld. Turning 1 pound of meat into 6 generous servings, the tomatoes added moisture, tang, and vibrant color, and the casserole stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each serving delivered fluffy, flavorful rice, studded with savory crumbles of beef and rich tomato in every spoonful. Families ate it hot, spooning portions straight from the skillet onto plates and serving it alongside steamed green beans, on a simple iceberg lettuce salad with vinegar dressing, or a slice of buttered bread for soaking up the juices. Some grandmas added a diced bell pepper, green or red, to the skillet along with the onion for extra sweetness and crunch. Others stirred in a handful of frozen corn kernels or a cup of canned kidney beans to add even more bulk, protein, and nutrition. A few added a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce to the mixture for umami depth, or stirred in a dash of hot sauce for a subtle kick of heat. Some topped the finished casserole with a generous handful of shredded cheddar cheese, covering the skillet and letting the residual heat melt the cheese into a gooey, golden topping. The casserole was economical, filling, colorful, and simple, requiring only 1 skillet, 1 lid, and 1 wooden spoon. By the 1980s, boxed rice mixes with pre-seasoned flavor packets and microwave rice dinners replaced the homemade casserole, and the original recipe was forgotten. It was satisfying, and these croquettes fed 6 people for 90 cents in 1952. Grandma opened 2 cans of pink salmon, drained them thoroughly, and flaked the fish into a large mixing bowl using a fork, carefully picking out any small bones and pieces of skin as she went. She peeled 3 large russet potatoes, cut them into chunks, and boiled them in a pot of salted water until they were fork-tender and soft. She drained the potatoes, returned them to the pot, and mashed them until completely smooth and lump-free, adding a small pat of butter for richness. She let the mashed potatoes cool slightly, then added them to the bowl with the flaked salmon. She cracked 2 eggs into the mixture, added 1 finely diced onion, a tablespoon of chopped fresh parsley for color and freshness, a generous squeeze of fresh lemon juice to brighten the flavor, salt, and black pepper. She stirred everything together with her hands until the mixture was well blended and held together when squeezed. She shaped the mixture into 12 oval croquettes, each about the size of a small egg, pressing firmly to compact them so they wouldn't fall apart during frying. She poured a cup of plain breadcrumbs onto a plate and rolled each croquette in the crumbs, coating all sides evenly and pressing gently to help the coating adhere. In a large cast-iron skillet, she heated a quarter-inch of vegetable oil over medium-high heat until it shimmered, and a breadcrumb dropped in sizzled immediately. She carefully placed the croquettes in the hot oil, working in batches to avoid crowding, and fried them for 3 minutes on each side until they turned golden brown, crispy, and perfectly cooked. She drained the finished croquettes on a plate lined with paper towels to absorb any excess oil, then transferred them to a serving platter and kept them warm. The mashed potatoes stretched the salmon, turning 2 cans of fish into 12 croquettes. The breadcrumbs added a satisfying crunch, and the croquettes stayed warm on the platter for second helpings. Each croquette delivered flaky, tender fish, creamy mashed potato, and a crispy golden crust in every bite. Families ate them hot, serving each croquette with a squeeze of fresh lemon, a generous dollop of tartar sauce or mayonnaise, and a side of creamy coleslaw and boiled green beans. Some grandmas added a tablespoon of dill pickle relish to the mixture for tang and crunch, or stirred in a pinch of cayenne pepper for a subtle kick of heat. Others used a teaspoon of Old Bay seasoning for a classic seafood flavor. A few used crushed cornflakes or saltine crackers instead of breadcrumbs for a different texture and flavor. Some baked the croquettes on a greased baking sheet at 400 degrees for 20 minutes instead of frying, turning them halfway through to reduce the oil and mess. The croquettes were economical, portable, delicious, and simple, requiring only 1 pot, 1 bowl, and 1 skillet. These 5 stretchers, cabbage patted beef skillet, egg noodle chicken bake, potato and sausage hash, tomato rice beef casserole, salmon potato croquettes, turned modest protein into hearty meals for under $2, feeding families of 6. Yet today, all have vanished from modern kitchens, replaced by frozen dinners and fast food. It was satisfying, and this chili fed 6 people for $1.20 in 1958. Grandma browned 1 pound of ground beef in a large cast-iron skillet with 1 diced onion until no pink remained, draining off any excess fat. She added 1 can of kidney beans, 1 can of diced tomatoes, 1 can of tomato sauce, and a cup of water, stirring everything together. She seasoned the mixture with 2 tablespoons of chili powder, a teaspoon of cumin, a pinch of cayenne pepper for heat, salt, and black pepper. The chili simmered uncovered for 20 minutes, thickening into a rich, spicy base that filled the kitchen with warmth. While the chili bubbled on the stove, she mixed a simple cornbread batter in a separate bowl, 1 cup of yellow cornmeal, 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 beaten egg, 1 cup of milk, and 2 tablespoons of melted butter. She stirred the batter until just combined, being careful not to overmix. Once the chili had thickened, she poured the cornbread batter evenly over the hot chili in the skillet, spreading it gently to cover the surface completely. She transferred the skillet to a preheated oven at 400 degrees and baked for 25 minutes until the cornbread turned golden brown and a toothpick inserted in the center came out clean. The cornbread stretched the chili, the beans added protein and bulk, and the dish stayed warm on the table for second helpings. Each serving delivered spicy, hearty chili topped with a wedge of sweet, crumbly cornbread. Families ate it hot, straight from the skillet, scooping portions onto plates and topping them with a dollop of sour cream, shredded cheddar cheese, and a sprinkle of chopped green onions. Some grandmas added diced bell peppers to the chili for extra vegetables or stirred in a handful of frozen corn for sweetness. Others topped the cornbread batter with sliced jalapenos before baking for an extra kick of heat. A few stirred a tablespoon of brown sugar into the chili to balance the acidity of the tomatoes. The dish was economical, filling, and simple, requiring only 1 skillet, 1 bowl, and one oven. By the 1980s, canned chili and boxed cornbread mixes replaced the homemade version, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to open a can, heat it in the microwave, and stir in a cornbread mix, skipping the labor of simmering from scratch and making batter by hand. The ritual of stretching $1.20 worth of beef and beans into 6 servings disappeared, and the cornbread-topped chili that fed a family for pennies vanished from American tables. It was satisfying, and this casserole fed 6 people for $1.10 in 1953. Grandma boiled 2 cups of elbow macaroni in a large pot of salted water until tender, then drained it and set it aside. She diced 1 pound of cooked ham, often left over from Sunday dinner or a holiday meal, into half-inch cubes, making sure to trim away any excess fat. In a large mixing bowl, she combined the cooked macaroni, diced ham, 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, half a cup of milk to thin the soup, 1 cup of frozen peas for color and sweetness, 1 finely diced onion, and a generous pinch of black pepper. She stirred the mixture until everything was evenly coated with the creamy sauce, then spread it into a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish. She topped the casserole with a handful of crushed cornflakes mixed with 2 tablespoons of melted butter, spreading the topping evenly to create a crunchy golden crust. The dish went into a preheated oven at 350 degrees and baked uncovered for 30 minutes until the top turned golden brown and the edges bubbled. The macaroni stretched the ham, the peas added sweetness and nutrition, and the casserole stayed warm on the table for second helpings. Each serving delivered tender pasta, savory ham, sweet peas, and creamy sauce in every bite, with a satisfying crunch from the cornflake topping. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish, using a large spoon to scoop generous portions onto plates. It was often served alongside steamed carrots, a simple green salad, or sliced tomatoes from the garden. Some grandmas added a cup of shredded cheddar cheese to the mixture before baking, creating a richer, cheesier casserole. Others stirred in a tablespoon of Dijon mustard or a splash of Worcestershire sauce for tang and depth. A few used cream of celery soup instead of mushroom, or topped the casserole with breadcrumbs instead of cornflakes for a different texture. And some added diced bell peppers or sliced mushrooms to the mixture for extra vegetables. The casserole was economical, comforting, and simple, requiring only 1 pot, 1 bowl, and 1 baking dish. By the 1980s, boxed macaroni and cheese and frozen TV dinners replaced the homemade casserole, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to heat instant mac and cheese in the microwave or order takeout, skipping the labor of dicing ham, mixing ingredients, and baking. The ritual of stretching $1.10 worth of ham and macaroni into 6 servings disappeared, and the macaroni and ham casserole that fed a family for pennies vanished from American kitchens. That casserole that turned Sunday's leftover ham into Monday's supper is now a lost tradition. It was satisfying, and this stew fed 6 people for $1.35 in 1955. Grandma boiled a whole chicken in a large pot with enough water to cover, adding an onion cut in half, 2 stalks of celery, a bay leaf, a teaspoon of salt, and half a teaspoon of black pepper. She let it simmer for an hour until the meat was tender and falling off the bone. She removed the chicken from the pot, let it cool slightly, then shredded the meat into bite-sized pieces, discarding the bones, skin, and gristle. The shredded chicken went back into the broth. She added diced carrots, diced potatoes, diced celery, and a generous handful of frozen peas, Then let the stew simmer for another 20 minutes until the vegetables were tender. To thicken the broth, she whisked 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour with half a cup of cold water to make a smooth slurry. Then stirred it into the pot and cooked for 5 minutes until the stew thickened into a rich, creamy consistency. While the stew simmered, she mixed a simple biscuit dough in a bowl. 2 cups of flour, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, 3 tablespoons of cold shortening cut in with a fork, and 3/4 of a cup of milk stirred in until just combined. She dropped spoonfuls of the dough on top of the bubbling stew, spacing them evenly, then covered the pot with a tight-fitting lid and steamed the biscuits for 15 minutes without lifting the lid until they puffed up and cooked through. The biscuits stretched the chicken, the vegetables added bulk and nutrition, and the stew stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each bowl delivered tender chicken, soft vegetables, fluffy biscuits, and rich and creamy broth in every spoonful. Families ate it hot, ladling generous portions into deep bowls and dunking the biscuits into the broth to soak up every drop. Some grandmas added a splash of heavy cream or a tablespoon of butter to the broth for extra richness and silkiness. Others stirred in a pinch of dried thyme, rosemary, or sage for depth of flavor. A few used canned refrigerated biscuits instead of making homemade dough, or topped the stew with squares of pie crust instead of biscuits. Some added a cup of cooked rice or egg noodles to the pot for even more bulk and to stretch the meal further. The stew was economical, comforting, and simple, requiring only 1 large pot and a wooden spoon. By the 1980s, canned chicken stew and frozen pot pies replaced the homemade version, and the original recipe was forgotten. Many younger cooks preferred to open a can or microwave a frozen meal, skipping the labor of boiling a whole chicken and making biscuits from scratch. It was satisfying, and this soup fed 6 people for $1 in 1951. Grandma browned 1 pound of ground beef in a large pot with 1 diced onion, stirring frequently until no pink remained and the meat was crumbly. She drained off most of the fat, leaving just a tablespoon or 2 for flavor. She added 4 cups of beef broth or water, 1 can of diced tomatoes with their juice, 2 large carrots peeled and diced, 2 stalks of celery diced, a bay leaf, a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of black pepper, and a teaspoon of dried thyme. She brought the mixture to a boil, then reduced the heat and let it simmer uncovered for 20 minutes until the vegetables were tender and the flavors melded together. She added 2 cups of uncooked egg noodles to the pot and simmered for an additional 10 minutes, stirring occasionally until the noodles were soft and had absorbed some of the broth, thickening the soup. The noodles stretched the beef, the vegetables added color, texture, and nutrition, and the soup stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each bowl delivered tender noodles, savory beef, and soft vegetables swimming in a rich, flavorful broth. Families ate it hot, ladling generous portions into bowls and serving it with slices of buttered bread, saltine crackers, or cornbread on the side for dunking. Some grandmas added a handful of frozen peas, a cup of cooked white rice, or a diced potato to the pot for extra bulk and to make the soup even heartier. Others stirred in a splash of Worcestershire sauce for umami depth, or added a tablespoon of tomato paste to deepen the tomato flavor and color. A few topped each bowl with a sprinkle of fresh chopped parsley or grated Parmesan cheese for a finishing touch. Some added a pinch of red pepper flakes for a subtle kick of heat. The soup was economical, filling, and simple, requiring only 1 large pot and a wooden spoon for stirring. By the 1980s, canned beef soups and instant ramen noodles became pantry staples, and the labor of browning meat, chopping vegetables, and simmering soup from scratch seemed excessive and time-consuming. Younger cooks preferred to open a can and heat it on the stove or microwave a styrofoam cup of instant noodles, skipping the hours of preparation and the mess of cooking from scratch. The ritual of stretching $1's worth of beef and noodles into 6 steaming bowls disappeared, and the beef and noodle soup that fed a family for pennies vanished from American tables. That soup that turned a pound of meat and a handful of noodles into 6 comforting bowls is now a forgotten memory, and the warmth it brought to cold evenings is only a story grandmothers tell. It was satisfying, and this pie fed 6 people for 80 cents in 1957. Grandma peeled 4 large russet potatoes and sliced them into thin, even rounds, about 1/8 of an inch thick, using a sharp knife or a mandolin slicer. She peeled and sliced 2 large yellow onions into thin rings, separating the layers. She generously greased a 9-inch pie dish with butter, then began layering. She arranged half of the potato slices in overlapping circles on the bottom of the dish, covering the entire surface. She topped the potatoes with half of the onion rings, spreading them evenly, then seasoned the layer with salt, black pepper, and a pinch of dried thyme for flavor. She repeated the process with the remaining potatoes and onions, creating a second layer, and seasoned again. She dotted the top layer with 2 tablespoons of butter, cut into small pieces. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish, cutting it into wedges and serving it alongside slices of ham, fried sausage, or a simple green salad. Some grandmas added a layer of shredded cheddar cheese or Swiss cheese between the potato and onion layers, creating a richer, more indulgent pie. Others stirred in a handful of crumbled bacon bits for smoky flavor. A few used chicken broth instead of milk for deeper, savory flavor, or added a bay leaf to the layers before baking. Some topped the pie with a handful of breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter for a crunchy topping. The pie was economical, comforting, and simple, requiring only a knife, a pie dish, and an oven. By the 1980s, frozen potato side dishes, instant mashed potatoes, and boxed au gratin mixes replaced the homemade pie, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to microwave frozen potatoes or prepare instant sides, skipping the labor of peeling, slicing, and layering by hand. The ritual of stretching 80 cents worth of potatoes and onions into 6 servings disappeared, and the potato and onion pie that fed a family for pennies vanished from American kitchens. That pie that turned humble ingredients into comfort is now a lost tradition. These 5 stretchers, cornbread-topped chili, macaroni and ham casserole, chicken and biscuit stew, beef and noodle soup, potato and onion pie, turned humble ingredients into hearty meals for under $2, feeding families of 6. Yet today, all have vanished from modern kitchens, replaced by canned soups and frozen convenience foods. It was satisfying, and this casserole fed 6 people for $1 in 1954. Grandma drained 2 cans of pink salmon, carefully flaking the fish into a large bowl with a fork and picking out any small bones and pieces of skin. She boiled 1½ cups of long-grain white rice in a pot of salted water until tender and fluffy, then drained it and let it cool slightly. In the mixing bowl, she combined the flaked salmon and cooked rice, then opened 1 can of cream of celery soup and thinned it with half a cup of milk, stirring until smooth. She poured the soup mixture over the salmon and rice, then added 1 finely diced onion, a tablespoon of fresh lemon juice for brightness, a pinch of black pepper, and a teaspoon of dried dill for flavor. She stirred everything together until the ingredients were evenly distributed and coated with the creamy sauce. She spread the mixture into a greased 9 by 9-inch baking dish, smoothing the top with a spatula. She topped the casserole with a generous handful of crushed saltine crackers mixed with 2 tablespoons of melted butter, spreading the topping evenly to create a golden, crunchy crust. Eat the dish baked uncovered in a preheated oven at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the top turned golden brown and the edges bubbled. The rice stretched the salmon, the soup added creaminess and moisture, and the casserole stayed warm on the table for second helpings. Each serving delivered fluffy rice, flaky fish, and creamy sauce in every bite, topped with a satisfying crunch. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish, scooping generous portions onto plates and serving it alongside steamed green beans, a garden salad, or sliced tomatoes. Some grandmas added a cup of frozen peas to the mixture for color and sweetness, or stirred in diced celery or sliced mushrooms for extra vegetables and texture. Others used cream of mushroom soup instead of celery for a different flavor profile, or topped the casserole with breadcrumbs instead of crackers. A few stirred in a tablespoon of pickle relish for tang, or added a dash of paprika for color and a hint of smokiness. Some used fresh cooked salmon when available, though canned was more economical. The casserole was simple, filling, and economical, requiring only 1 pot, 1 bowl, and 1 baking dish. By the 1980s, fresh salmon fillets and sushi-grade fish became more popular and accessible, and the humble canned salmon casserole seemed old-fashioned and outdated. Younger cooks preferred to grill or bake fresh fish, or order restaurant-quality seafood, skipping the labor of flaking canned salmon and mixing ingredients by hand. The ritual of stretching $1's worth of salmon and rice into 6 servings disappeared, and the salmon rice casserole that fed a family for pennies vanished from American kitchens. It was satisfying, and this dish fed 6 people for $1.25 in 1956. Grandma bought 6 bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs from the butcher, choosing the least expensive cuts. She patted each thigh dry with a clean towel to remove excess moisture, which helped the coating stick. She seasoned both sides of each thigh generously with salt, black pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder. She poured half a cup of yellow cornmeal onto a large plate and mixed in a teaspoon of paprika for color and a pinch of cayenne pepper for a subtle kick. She dredged each thigh in the seasoned cornmeal, pressing gently to ensure the coating adhered evenly to both sides. In a large cast-iron skillet, she melted 2 tablespoons of lard over medium-high heat until it shimmered. She carefully placed the coated thighs in the hot skillet, skin side down, and fried them for 6 minutes without moving them, allowing the cornmeal crust to turn golden brown and crispy. She flipped each thigh with tongs and fried for another 6 minutes on the second side. She then transferred the entire skillet to a preheated oven at 350 degrees and baked for 20 minutes until the meat was cooked through, juicy, and no longer pink at the bone. She removed the thighs to a serving platter and let them rest for a few minutes before serving. The cornmeal crust added texture, flavor, and visual appeal, stretching the chicken to feed 6 hungry people. Each thigh delivered tender, juicy meat encased in a crunchy, golden, slightly spicy crust that crackled with every bite. Families ate it hot, serving the thighs alongside creamy mashed potatoes, tangy coleslaw, and a warm biscuit or slice of cornbread. Some grandmas added a teaspoon of dried herbs, thyme, oregano, or rosemary, to the cornmeal mixture for an earthy, aromatic flavor. Others used all-purpose flour instead of cornmeal for a more traditional fried chicken coating, or mixed flour and cornmeal together for a hybrid texture. A few added a tablespoon of grated Parmesan cheese to the coating for a savory umami boost. Some drizzled the finished thighs with honey or hot sauce before serving for a sweet or spicy finish. The dish was economical, filling, satisfying, and simple, requiring only one skillet, one oven, and minimal cleanup. By the 1980s, boneless, skinless chicken breasts became the preferred cut, and fast food fried chicken chains replaced the labor of coating and frying thighs at home. Younger cooks preferred to bake bland, skinless breasts or order a bucket of fried chicken from a drive-thru, skipping the lard, the mess of pan frying, and the skill required to achieve a perfect crust. The ritual of stretching $1.25 worth of chicken into 6 servings with cornmeal disappeared. It was satisfying, and this bake fed 6 people for 85 cents in 1952. Grandma boiled 2 cups of elbow macaroni in a large pot of salted water, stirring occasionally until the pasta was tender and cooked through. She drained the macaroni in a colander and set it aside to cool slightly. She opened 2 cans of diced tomatoes and poured them into a large mixing bowl, juice and all. She stirred in 1 finely diced onion, a generous pinch of sugar to balance the natural acidity of the tomatoes, a teaspoon of dried basil for an Italian flair, salt, and black pepper. She added the cooked macaroni to the tomato mixture, stirring until every piece of pasta was evenly coated with the tangy sauce. She spread the mixture into a greased 8 by 8 inch baking dish, smoothing the top with a spatula. She topped the casserole with a generous handful of plain breadcrumbs, mixed with 2 tablespoons of melted butter, then sprinkled grated Parmesan cheese over the breadcrumbs for a savory, salty finish. The dish baked uncovered in a preheated oven at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the top turned golden brown and crispy, and the edges bubbled with tomato sauce. The tomatoes stretched the pasta, the breadcrumbs and cheese added crunch and flavor, and the bake stayed warm on the table for second helping. Each serving delivered tender macaroni, tangy tomato sauce, and a crispy, cheesy topping in every bite. Families ate it hot, straight from the dish, scooping generous portions onto plates and serving it alongside steamed green beans, a simple lettuce salad, or a slice of buttered Italian bread. Some grandmas added a cup of cooked ground beef or Italian sausage to the mixture for extra protein and heartiness. Others stirred in a handful of frozen peas or diced bell peppers for added vegetables, color, and nutrition. A few used fresh tomatoes from the garden when they were in season, blanching and chopping them to replace the canned tomatoes. Some added a splash of heavy cream to the sauce for richness, or topped the bake with shredded mozzarella cheese instead of Parmesan for a gooier, stretchier finish. A few added a pinch of red pepper flakes to the sauce for a subtle kick of heat. The bake was economical, filling, colorful, and simple, requiring only 1 pot, 1 bowl, and 1 baking dish. By the 1980s, boxed macaroni and cheese with powdered sauce packets and jarred pasta sauces replaced the homemade bake, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to boil pasta and stir in a pouch of neon orange cheese powder or pour thick sauce from a jar, skipping the labor of dicing onions, mixing ingredients by hand, and baking. The ritual of stretching 85 cents worth of macaroni and tomatoes into 6 servings disappeared, and the tomato macaroni bake that fed a family for pennies. It was satisfying, and this dish fed 6 people for $1.15 in 1958. Grandma boiled a whole chicken in a large pot with enough water to cover, adding a halved onion, 2 stalks of celery, a bay leaf, a teaspoon of salt, and half a teaspoon of black pepper. She let it simmer gently for an hour until the meat was tender and falling off the bone. She removed the chicken from the pot, let it cool slightly, then shredded the meat into bite-sized pieces, discarding the bones, skin, and any gristle. She reserved 3 cups of the flavorful broth, skimming off some of the fat from the top. In a large saucepan, she melted 3 tablespoons of butter over medium heat, then whisked in 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, stirring constantly for 2 minutes until the mixture formed a smooth golden roux. She slowly poured in the reserved chicken broth, whisking constantly to prevent lumps from forming, then brought the gravy to a gentle simmer. She cooked the gravy for 5 minutes, stirring frequently, until it thickened to a rich, velvety consistency that coated the back of a spoon. She stirred the shredded chicken into the gravy, then added a splash of milk or cream for extra richness and silkiness. She seasoned the mixture with additional salt, black pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder to taste. Meanwhile, she boiled 2 cups of long-grain white rice in a separate pot of salted water until tender, fluffy, and perfectly cooked. She drained the rice and fluffed it with a fork. She served the creamy chicken gravy generously ladled over mounds of hot, fluffy rice. The rice stretched the chicken, the gravy added richness and moisture, and the dish stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each plate delivered fluffy rice, tender chunks of chicken, and savory, creamy gravy in every forkful. Families ate it hot, serving it alongside steamed peas, green beans, or a simple garden salad with vinegar dressing. Some grandmas added diced carrots, celery, or sliced mushrooms to the gravy for extra vegetables, texture, and nutrition. Others used store-bought chicken broth from a can instead of homemade to save time, though the flavor wasn't quite as rich. A few stirred in a tablespoon of sour cream or Greek yogurt for extra tang and creaminess. Some added a pinch of dried thyme, rosemary, or sage for an earthy, herbaceous depth. A few topped each, serving with a sprinkle of fresh chopped parsley or chives for color and freshness. The dish was economical, comforting, filling, and simple, requiring only 2 pots, a whisk, and a wooden spoon. By the 1980s, rotisserie chickens from the supermarket and jarred chicken gravy replaced the homemade version, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to buy pre-cooked chicken and heat-jarred gravy in the microwave. It was satisfying, and this skillet fed 6 people for 95 cents in 1951. Grandma browned 1 pound of ground beef in a large cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat, breaking it up with a wooden spoon and stirring frequently. She added 1 finely diced onion and cooked until the meat showed no pink, and the onion turned soft and translucent. She drained off most of the fat, leaving just a tablespoon or 2 in the skillet for flavor. She opened 2 large cans of baked beans in tomato sauce and poured them into the skillet, stirring to combine everything evenly. She added a tablespoon of brown sugar for sweetness, a teaspoon of yellow mustard for tang, a generous splash of Worcestershire sauce for umami depth, and a pinch of black pepper. She stirred the mixture well, then let it simmer uncovered over low heat for 15 minutes, stirring occasionally, until the liquid reduced slightly and the mixture thickened into a rich, sweet and savory skillet meal. The beans stretched the beef, the brown sugar and mustard added a sweet tangy complexity, and the skillet stayed warm on the stove for second helpings. Each serving delivered tender beans, savory beef, and a thick, flavorful sauce in every spoonful. Families ate it hot, spooning portions straight from the skillet onto plates and serving it alongside warm cornbread, creamy coleslaw, or boiled potatoes with butter. Some grandmas added a diced bell pepper to the skillet with the onions for extra vegetables, color, and a slightly sweet crunch. Others stirred in a handful of crispy, diced bacon for smokiness and richness. A few added a splash of ketchup or barbecue sauce to the mixture for a tangy, tomato-forward flavor. Some stirred in a cup of cooked white rice or a handful of frozen corn kernels for additional bulk, and to stretch the meal even further. A few topped the finished skillet with a generous handful of shredded cheddar cheese, then placed it under the broiler for 2 minutes until the cheese melted and bubbled into a golden, gooey topping. The skillet was economical, filling, hearty, and simple, requiring only one cast-iron pan and a wooden spoon for stirring. By the 1980s, canned chili, microwave meals, and fast food takeout replaced the homemade skillet, and the original recipe was forgotten. Younger cooks preferred to open a can of chili and heat it in the microwave in under 3 minutes, or order a quick meal from a drive-thru, skipping the labor of browning meat, chopping onions, and simmering beans on the stove. The ritual of stretching 95 cents worth of beef and beans into 6 generous servings disappeared, and the baked bean beef skillet that fed a family for pennies vanished from American kitchens. That skillet that turned a can of beans and a pound of meat into 6 plates of comfort is now a lost tradition, and the sweetness and satisfaction it brought to Depression-era tables is only a memory grandmothers share. These 60 forgotten stretchers fed America through the hardest years. Grandma didn't need fancy ingredients, expensive cuts, or complicated techniques. She had flour, canned fish, a pound of beef, and the stubborn belief that her family would eat well, no matter what the bank account said. She stretched every dollar, every can, every leftover scrap into meals that filled 6 plates, warmed 6 bellies, and kept 6 people together at the table. These recipes weren't just food. They were survival, dignity, and love measured in spoonfuls. By the 1980s, we forgot. Microwave dinners replaced cast-iron skillets. Drive-thrus replaced homemade stews. Jarred sauces replaced simmering pots. We traded Grandma's recipes for convenience, and we lost something irreplaceable in the process. We lost the rhythm of her hands shaping croquettes, the smell of cornbread baking over chili, the sound of her wooden spoon scraping the bottom of the pot. We lost the knowledge that $1's worth of rice and beans could feed a family, that a can of salmon and a few potatoes could become supper, that love and ingenuity mattered more than money. But these recipes still exist. They're written in faded handwriting on index cards tucked in drawers. I whispered in the memories of grandchildren who watched her cook, preserved in church cookbooks gathering dust on shelves. They're waiting for us to remember. They're waiting for us to slow down, to open a can of tuna, to boil a pot of noodles, to stir flour into drippings and make gravy the way she did. They're waiting for us to teach our children that food doesn't have to be expensive to be good, that a casserole baked with care